welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really important topic for all of you who share your lives with cats. Feline mammary tumors.
That's right.
We've gathered quite a bit of information looking at, the latest scientific research, but also some interesting perspectives from traditional Eastern medicine.
Yeah, and the idea is to really give you a solid foundation, a good understanding of the basics.
Exactly.
We're drawing from peer-reviewed papers, but also looking at traditional Chinese medicine and Campo viewpoints, so kind of pulling together key info from these different areas.
We really want you to feel empowered with this knowledge. But, and this is super important, we need to be clear up front. Everything we talk about today is for educational purposes. It's meant to help you have, better, more informed chats with your veterinarian.
Absolutely. It is definitely not a substitute for professional veterinary advice or diagnosis or treatment. Your vet is always the final authority on your cat's health.
Right. Think of this as background information, context, to help you understand things better.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's dive in. The basics first. Where exactly are a cat's mammary glands?
Okay, so a typical cat usually has 8. They're arranged in 2 rows, 4 on each side, running along their belly and chest area.
8 glands, 2 rows.
Yeah.
Got it. And what's their normal job?
Well, their main function, naturally, is to produce milk to nurse kittens after giving birth.
Makes sense.
And this whole process, milk production, it's heavily regulated by hormones, particularly the female hormones like estrogen and progesterone.
Okay. Now, here's something I bet some listeners are wondering. What if your cat is spayed or neutered for male cats, though less common? Are they still at risk?
That's a really common question, and yes, unfortunately, they can still be at risk.
Oh, really?
Yeah. See, even when a cat is spayed and the ovaries are removed, the mammary tissue itself, it doesn't disappear. It's still there.
Ah.
And that tissue has been exposed to hormones previously, so it retains the potential to develop tumors later on. That hormonal influence is actually, a key part of why these tumors can develop.
Right, so the tissue is still responsive in a way.
You could say that, yes.
So we're talking about these growths, these tumors. Can you define what a tumor actually is in, medical terms? Is any lump a tumor?
Good question. No, not exactly. A tumor is specifically an abnormal growth of the body's own cells. The key things are that the growth is uncontrolled and excessive.
Uncontrolled and excessive.
Right. These cells just start multiplying without the normal signals telling them when to start or stop. It's not just inflammation or fluid buildup. It's a mass of new, abnormally growing cells.
Okay, that clarifies it. Now, we hear benign and malignant all the time when talking about tumors. What's the core difference we need to understand?
This distinction is absolutely critical. It really tells us how the tumor is likely to behave and what the implications are.
Okay.
Let's start with benign tumors, or LA in Japanese. These generally grow relatively slowly.
Slower growth.
Yes, and crucially, they stay put. They're localized to where they started. They don't spread to other parts of the body.
So they don't metastasize.
Exactly. No metastasis. They tend to grow by expanding outwards, kind of pushing against the surrounding normal tissue. Think of it like a balloon inflating. They usually have a pretty clear boundary. You can tell where the tumor ends and the normal tissue begins. And generally speaking, they aren't life-threatening.
And can they be treated?
Often, yes. Surgical removal is frequently curative. An example you might hear about is a mammary adenoma. That's a common type of benign mammary tumor in both cats and dogs.
Okay, so benign, slower, stays put, usually treatable with surgery. Sounds like the better scenario.
Generally, yes.
Now, what about the other side? Malignant tumors,
The
ones we call cancer.
Right. Malignant tumors or cancers are quite different. First, they tend to grow faster.
Faster growth.
And instead of just pushing tissue aside, they actively invade and destroy the surrounding normal tissues. It's an infiltrative growth.
So they're actually breaking into the nearby areas.
Precisely. And because of that, their borders are often poorly defined. It can be hard to see exactly where the cancer stops and healthy tissue starts.
That sounds much more aggressive.
It is. But the absolute defining characteristic, the most important feature of malignant tumors, is their ability to metastasize. That's sayu in Japanese.
Metastasis again. So spreading.
Yes. Cancer cells can break away from the original tumor, get into the bloodstream or the lymphatic system, travel through the body, and then set up new tumors in distant locations.
Like where?
Common sites are lymph nodes, the lungs, liver, even bones. Think of it like seeds being carried by the wind and starting new plants far away.
And that's really why cancer is so serious, isn't it? It doesn't stay contained.
Exactly. That ability to spread makes malignant tumors much more dangerous, much more life-threatening. Treatment is usually more complex too, and even after surgery, there's a higher risk the cancer might come back.
And just to be crystal clear, when doctors or vets say cancer, they specifically mean these malignant tumors.
Yes, that's the correct usage. Cancer refers to malignant tumors.
You mentioned different types earlier, carcinoma and sarcoma. Can you briefly explain that?
Sure, it relates to the type of cell the cancer originates from. Carcinomas start in epithelial cells. These are the cells that line the surfaces of the body, inside and out, and also make up glands.
Like mammary glands.
Exactly. Since mammary glands are glands, most malignant mammary tumors are carcinomas. We call them mammary carcinomas.
Okay. And sarcomas.
Sarcomas arise from connective tissues, things like muscle, bone, fat, cartilage, blood vessels, so non-epithelial cells.
Got it. So for mammary tumors, we're mostly dealing with carcinomas because they start in gland cells.
That's generally the case, yes. And again, I really want to emphasize that metastasis, that Zeus, is the fundamental difference between benign and malignant, and it's why cancer poses such a threat. Lung metastasis, for example, is a very serious development in both cats and dogs.
Okay. This leads to a really practical question for us as cat owners. If we find a lump, can we tell just by feeling it or looking at it if it's benign or malignant?
Absolutely, unequivocally no. That's a critical point. You cannot determine if a lump is benign or malignant just by its appearance or how it feels. Some malignant tumors can start out very small, maybe feel quite smooth or movable initially, and seem harmless.
So a tiny lump, maybe the size of a pea, could still be malignant.
Yes, absolutely. That's why self-diagnosis is impossible and potentially dangerous here.
So what's needed then?
A proper veterinary examination is essential. Just palpating, just feeling the lump isn't enough for a diagnosis. You need diagnostic tests.
Like what kind of test?
Typically cytology or histopathology. Cytology often involves fine needle aspiration, using a small needle to suck out some cells for examination under a microscope.
Like a quick look at the individual cells.
Kinda, yeah. Histopathology is usually considered more definitive. It involves taking a biopsy, a small piece of the tumor tissue, sometimes the whole lump after removal, and examining its structure under the microscope.
So looking at the tissue architecture, not just loose cells.
Exactly. It gives a much clearer picture of whether it's invading, the type of cells involved, and so on. It's the gold standard for diagnosis.
That really drives home the need for professional veterinary assessment. Don't guess, get it checked.
Please, yes, that's the message.
Now, let's focus specifically on feline mammary tumors. You hinted they might be particularly concerning. Why do they demand special attention?
They really do. There are a few key reasons. First, they're actually quite common in female cats.
How common?
They're reported as the third most frequent type of tumor overall in female cats, right after skin tumors and lymphoma. They account for something like 17% of all tumors diagnosed in females, so it's not a rare disease.
Okay, third most common. That's significant. But wasn't there something else, something more worrying?
Yes, and this is the point that cannot be stressed enough, the malignancy rate.
Okay.
While in dogs, as we mentioned, it's roughly a 50-50 split between benign and malignant mammary tumors.
Right.
In cats, the vast majority, somewhere between 80% and 90%, are malignant. They are cancer.
80 to 90%. Wow, that's incredibly high.
It is. It's a stark difference compared to dogs, and it fundamentally changes how we have to approach any lump found on a cat's mammary gland.
So, if you find a lump on your cat, the odds are overwhelmingly that it's cancerous.
The statistics strongly suggest that, yes, which is why immediate veterinary attention is so critical. There's very little room for a wait-and-see approach in cats.
That's a sobering statistic.
And it's not just that they're likely malignant. Feline mammary cancers also tend to be quite aggressive biologically.
What does aggressive mean in this context?
It means they often grow rapidly. They tend to invade the surrounding tissues relatively early in their course. And importantly, they have a higher propensity to metastasize, to spread to other organs, like the regional lymph nodes and especially the lungs, compared to many canine mammary tumors.
So faster growth, early invasion, and more likely to spread.
Yes. That sums up the general tendency. This aggressive nature makes early detection and prompt treatment even more crucial.
So that wait-and-see idea is definitely out for cats.
Absolutely out. Finding these tumors when they are small before they've had a chance to spread significantly improves the prognosis, the chance for successful treatment, maybe even a cure, and longer survival times.
Even really small lumps matter then?
Yes. Even lumps the size of a grain of rice or a small bean should be taken very seriously and checked by a vet without delay. Don't ignore small lumps in cats.
This underscores the importance of regular checks, especially for older female cats, particularly those not spayed.
Exactly. Older, intact, unspayed female cats are at the highest risk, given the hormonal influence we'll talk more about, combined with this high malignancy rate and aggressive behavior.
Okay, let's transition then. What does modern Western medicine understand about why these tumors develop? You mentioned hormones and genes.
Right. So from a Western scientific perspective, cancer development is seen as multifactorial. It's usually not just one single cause, but a combination of factors that disrupt the normal, very complex processes controlling cell growth, division, and death.
A complex interplay of factors.
Yes. But for feline mammary tumors specifically, two major players are consistently highlighted: hormonal influences and genetic changes.
Let's break that down. Start with the hormones. How do they fit in?
Okay. As we touched on earlier, the female sex hormones, primarily estrogen and progesterone produced by the ovaries, are essential for the normal development and function of the mammary glands preparing for milk production, etc.
Right.
But there's very strong evidence that these same hormones are heavily involved in the development of mammary tumors. They seem to play a key role in promoting the growth of these abnormal cells.
And what's the evidence for that link?
The most compelling evidence comes from studies on Spaying.
Removing the ovaries.
Exactly, removing the main source of these hormones. Numerous studies show a dramatic reduction in the risk of developing mammary tumors in cats that are spayed.
How much of a reduction?
It's significant. And the timing matters. Spaying before the first heat cycle offers the most protection. Spaying later still helps, but the benefit decreases the longer the cat has been exposed to those hormonal cycles.
So prolonged exposure to these hormones seems to increase the risk.
That's the strong implication, yes. It suggests that repeated hormonal stimulation of the mammary tissue over time can contribute to the changes that lead to tumor formation. It's like the hormones are constantly telling the cells to grow, and eventually some cells might start ignoring the stop signals.
Okay, that makes sense. Hormones acting as a promoter. What about the genetic side of things?
Right. At its most fundamental level, cancer is a genetic disease. It starts with damage, or mutations, to the DNA within a cell's genes.
Damage to the instruction manual.
Kind of, yes. Normal cells have a sophisticated system to balance growth. There are genes that promote growth, called oncogenes. You can think of them like the accelerator pedal.
Okay.
And there are genes that suppress growth or trigger cell death if a damage is detected, called tumor suppressor genes. They act like the brakes.
Accelerator and brakes, keeping things in check.
Precisely. But mutations can mess this up. They might happen randomly during cell division or be caused by exposure to carcinogens, maybe certain viruses. These mutations can potentially switch the accelerator on permanently or disable the brakes.
And that leads to uncontrolled growth.
Yes. If that balance is lost, cells can start dividing uncontrollably, ignore signals to die when they should, and eventually form a tumor.
Have specific gene mutations been identified in feline mammary cancer?
Yes, research has found some. One very important tumor suppressor gene is called P53. It's sometimes called the guardian of the genome.
Guardian.
Yeah, its job is to monitor the cell's DNA. If it detects significant damage, P53 can halt cell division to allow for repair, or if the damage is too severe, it triggers apoptosis-programmed cell death, basically cell suicide.
So it eliminates potentially dangerous cells.
Exactly. And studies have found that mutations or decreased function of the P53 gene are quite common in feline mammary cancers. If P53 isn't working properly, damaged cells that should be destroyed might survive and proliferate, leading to cancer.
So faulty brakes are a common issue.
That seems to be a significant factor, yes. Researchers are also investigating other genes like BRCA1 and BRCA2.
Oh, those are well known in human breast cancer.
They are, and also in dogs. Their role in feline mammary cancer is still being actively studied, so we don't have the full picture yet for cats. But the general principle that specific genetic defects contribute to cancer is well established across species.
It sounds like these two factors, hormones and genes, probably work together, right? Not in isolation.
That's a very astute point. Yes, the current thinking is that they often interact.
How so?
Well, imagine a cell that has already acquired some genetic damage, maybe a mutation that makes it slightly more prone to uncontrolled growth. It has a sort of predisposition.
Okay, it's vulnerable.
Right. Now, if that vulnerable cell is repeatedly stimulated by growth-promoting hormones over many years, that stimulation might be the tipping point that pushes it fully into becoming a cancerous cell.
Ah, so the gene mutation is like the underlying weakness, and the hormones are the trigger or accelerator.
That's a good analogy. You could think of the gene mutation as the seed of cancer, and the hormones as the fertilizer that helps it grow. Spaying, then, is like removing the fertilizer.
That makes it clear. Are there other factors Western medicine considers?
Yes, definitely. Age is a big one.
Older cats are more at risk.
Generally, yes. Cancer risk tends to increase with age in most species. This is likely because there's more time for mutations to accumulate just through the natural process of cells dividing over a lifetime. Feline mammary tumors are most common in middle age to older cats, say 10 to 12 years on average.
What about breed? Does that play a role in cats?
Not as strongly as we sometimes see in dogs for certain cancers. There isn't a major clear-cut breed predisposition for mammary tumors in cats, although some studies have suggested Siamese cats might have a slightly higher incidence, but it's not as pronounced as, say, certain breeds being prone to mast cell tumors in dogs.
Okay. And other things like diet or obesity.
The links between things like obesity, specific diets, or environmental factors and feline mammary tumors are still under investigation. There isn't strong, conclusive evidence yet for these factors in cats, unlike the clear roles of hormones and age. Research is ongoing, though.
So, to summarize the Western view, it's complex, but hormones and genetic changes are seen as the primary drivers, with age also being a major risk factor.
That's a fair summary, yes.
Okay, now let's pivot completely. Let's explore how traditional Eastern medicine, like traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, or Japanese Kampo, might view something like a tumor. It's a very different lens, isn't it?
It is, yes. A fundamentally different way of conceptualizing health and disease. And just a reminder, these concepts are based on traditional theories, classical texts, and interpretations, not necessarily validated by Western scientific methodology.
Understood. It's a different framework. What's the core philosophy?
The core is a holistic perspective. The body is seen as an integrated whole, an ecosystem where everything is interconnected. Health is defined by the smooth, unimpeded flow and balance of vital substances and energy throughout the system.
Balance and flow.
Exactly. Disease, from this viewpoint, arises when there's a disruption, a blockage, a deficiency, or an excess that upsets this balance and hinders the flow. The focus is less on cellular abnormalities and more on the systemic functional imbalances.
You mentioned vital substances and energy. Can you elaborate on the key concepts like ki, blood, and water?
Right. These three ki, blood and water, or fluids, pronounced ki, ketsu, sui in Japanese Kampo, are considered fundamental. Ki is perhaps the hardest to translate directly. It's often described as vital life energy or life force.
The energy that animates the body.
Sort of, yes. It's the invisible force responsible for all physiological functions, movement, transformation, warmth, defense. Blood, ketsu, is similar to the Western concept but broader. It includes nourishment, but is also linked to mental activity and consciousness. Ki and blood are seen as intimately related. Ki moves the blood, and blood nourishes the ki.
Okay. And water.
Water refers to all the body fluids other than blood. So lymph, interstitial fluid, sweat, urine, saliva, all the clear fluids. They're involved in moistening, lubricating, cooling, and removing waste. This specific concept of ki, blood, and water as the three pillars was particularly developed and emphasized in Japanese Kampo medicine, building on older TCM ideas.
So health is the balanced flow of ki, blood, and water.
Yeah.
How does imbalance lead to disease, especially things like tumors?
A central concept in Eastern medicine pathology is stagnation. When the flow of ki, blood, or water becomes sluggish, blocked, or stagnant, it's believed to be a root cause of many illnesses.
Like a river getting dammed up.
Exactly. And that backup causes problems. Lumps, masses, and tumors are often viewed in this framework as a physical manifestation of chronic stagnation.
Can you break down the types of stagnation?
Sure. First, there's kitai, or ki stagnation. This is impaired flow of ki, maybe due to emotional stress, frustration, or suppression. It can cause symptoms like pain, often moving or distending, irritability, sighing, bloating. Crucially, ki stagnation can, over time, impede the flow of blood and water too, contributing to mass formation.
So stagnant energy can lead to stagnant fluids and blood.
That's the idea, yes. Then there's okatsu, or blood stasis. This means poor circulation, thick or stuck blood. It might relate to microcirculation issues in Western terms. Symptoms associated with the blood stasis include fixed stabbing pain, a dark or purplish tongue or complexion, dark spots, and the formation of palpable masses or tumors, particularly ones that feel hard and fixed in place. Prolonged key stagnation is often seen as a precursor to blood stasis.
Okay, so stuck blood leads to hard masses. What about water?
Stagnation of water is often described using terms like tanshitsu phlegm damp or sutai water stagnation. This refers to poor fluid metabolism and circulation, leading to an accumulation of excess fluids or metabolic waste products conceptualized as phlegm or dampness. This can cause edema, feelings of heaviness, sluggishness, and contribute to the formation of lumps, especially softer ones. This pathological phlegm can also combine with key stagnation and blood stasis to form more complex, stubborn masses.
So putting it all together, how might this perspective explain a feline mammary tumor?
From an Eastern medicine viewpoint, one might interpret a feline mammary tumor as the end result of chronic, deep-seated stagnation in the meridians, the energy pathways that run through the chest and abdomen.
Okay.
Perhaps starting with key stagnation may be triggered by hormonal fluctuations, which could be seen as disrupting key flow or chronic stress. This prolonged key stagnation could then lead to blood stasis and the accumulation of phlegm damp in the local area. Over time, these stagnant elements, qi, blood, phlegm, congeal and intertwine, eventually forming the physical mass, the tumor.
And diagnosis would involve looking at the whole cat.
Absolutely. An Eastern medicine practitioner wouldn't just focus on the lump. They'd assess the cat's overall constitution and pattern of imbalance by looking at their appetite, energy, digestion, stool, tongue appearance, pulse quality, and behavior to understand the underlying stagnation pattern.
It really is a completely different way of looking at the same problem. Western medicine focuses on the micro-level genes, cells, molecules. Eastern medicine focuses on the macro-level systemic flow, balance, and energetic patterns.
Precisely. They're different paradigms, different ways of making sense of life, health, and disease. It's interesting to ponder potential, very tentative bridges. For instance, chronic inflammation, a key factor in Western cancer models, involves processes like poor circulation and fluid buildup, which resonates somewhat with the Eastern concepts of blood and water stagnation.
And maybe hormonal imbalances disrupting cellular signals in the West could be seen as disrupting qi flow in the East.
Perhaps, but we have to be careful not to force direct equivalences. They are distinct systems of thought. But exploring both can certainly broaden our perspective on the complexities involved.
Absolutely. Okay, let's try to summarize the key takeaways from this first part of our deep dive. What are the most crucial points for listeners?
All right. First, remember, cats typically have those 8 mammary glands, and that's where these tumors can arise.
Right.
Second, understand the difference. A tumor is abnormal growth. It can be benign, localized, slow-growing, or malignant, cancerous, invasive, capable of spreading metastasis.
And the really critical point for cats.
The critical point is that an estimated 80 to 90% of feline mammary tumors are malignant or cancer. This is drastically higher than in dogs.
That number is key.
It really is. Because of that high malignancy rate, any lump you find on your cat's mammary area, regardless of how small it seems, needs prompt veterinary evaluation. Early detection before spread occurs is absolutely vital for improving the outcome. Don't wait.
Get it checked ASAP?
Exactly. We also discussed the primary factors thought to be involved. Western medicine points strongly towards hormones, especially prolonged estrogen and progesterone exposure, and underlying genetic mutations, like problems with the p53 gene, as major contributors. Age is also a significant risk factor.
And the Eastern perspective.
Traditional Eastern medicine offers a different view, suggesting tumors arise from chronic stagnation blockages in the flow of key, vital energy, blood, and water fluids, leading to the formation of a mass.
So 2 different ways of understanding the why.
Yes. This first chapter gave us the essential background. In our next segments, we'll delve deeper into diagnosis, how vets determine the stage of the cancer, the various treatment options available, and ongoing care. But always, always, the final decisions and treatment plans need to be made in partnership with your veterinarian.
That's the constant refrain. So the main message for now. High malignancy risk in cats means be vigilant, act quickly if you find a lump, and talk to your vet.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
We really hope this overview helps you feel more prepared for those conversations. And maybe, just as a final thought to leave you with, considering these different viewpoints, the detailed cellular focus of the West and the holistic systemic view of the East, what does that contrast tell you about the sheer complexity of health and disease in our cats?
It certainly highlights that there's often more than one way to look at a biological problem, doesn't it?
It does. Perhaps it points toward the value of integrating different kinds of knowledge, or just reminds us that there's still so much to learn about keeping our feline friends healthy. Something to ponder.